I need to reassure you just how shit it's going to be. I'm going to share a story with you, and somebody needs to take responsibility for telling me when to stop. Somebody needs to do that. Tell me to stop. But wait until the right time. Don't just go, stop now after I've only been going for 5 minutes. And just to put things into perspective, I want to share with you the story of the young, looked-after guy that I worked with in Edinburgh. He was an apprentice, modern apprentice, and he disappeared. And I didn't see him for about 4 months. And I rocked up to a conference in B, and I walked in, and there he was. And he looked at me, and he goes, "Davy, how you doing, man? You all right?" Which is hello in Scottish. And I said, "I'm fine, Chris, how about you?" And he goes, "Davy, it's great, man. I couldn't hack that Edinburgh thing. It's too much for my head. He's just going running, he's stretched in my box like, hey, just couldn't hack it. I had to get up, just get it." Which I wasn't doing too well in Edinburgh, so I moved on. And he said, "But it's all right, Davy, I'm sorry to do it now." And I went, "Chris, that's brilliant. I'm working half days. Well, who cares? And do you know what, Davy? I now know what I'm going to do with the rest of my life." And I went, "Chris, that's brilliant. What are you going to do?" He goes, "Davy, I'm going to do the same as you. I'm going to talk shite for money." That's the warning that you got. And just to make my life even more difficult today, I've done 2 really stupid things. Okay, the first really stupid thing I did was I went to Amjad Ali's session. He is sitting up at the back of the room. He looks like nothing. You would never know, because he just looks like an ordinary human being. But that man should consistently have his underwear on view in the style of a superhero, because he was brilliant this morning. And if you didn't go to his session, go onto his website, look at the resources that are there. He's a one-man lepidoptery industry. He just collects butterflies and fires them out, and he always gives credit to the people he steals from, which is more than I ever do. And that's a really good thing. So I went to hear him, and after that I felt kind of totally inadequate. And then I sat through Hywel Roberts. Was anybody else at Hywel Roberts' session? What a dick. I mean, I am fully now taking advantage of the certificate 18. I mean, how dare he be that entertaining? I mean, how dare he do that? I mean, people, honestly, there was an incontinence industry in here in the session before lunchtime. It was like being in a saga tour. People were having colostomy bags fitted. They couldn't contain themselves. And not only that, but there was content as well. Yeah? And that was amazing. And I planned to do a session about educational tourism and why you don't have to do these things. You know, why you don't actually, if you want to improve things, you don't really actually have to do that. You don't even have to do that. And you also, there's another thing you don't have to do. You don't have to toodle to Taiwan, and you don't have to cruise to Canada, not even if you're me. So there's a whole set of things that you don't now need to do. And I'm just telling you that straight away, because I hate this obsession with educational tourism. And here are some of the reasons why I hate it. Because if we're talking about change, then one of the key things about change is that context is absolutely vital to change. If you really want to be successful in terms of management of change, you've got to have 2 things. You've got to have traction. You've got to have grip on the ground. You've got to have something that responds to the situation that you're working in and trying to move forward from. And you've got to have momentum. And if you have too much momentum, you won't get people to move with you. And one of the things I keep banging on about, and some people in the room will have heard me bang on about it before, is teaching is a really scary job. Right? I mean, you guys are the shock troops of education. I mean, you're here. You plainly don't have any lives at all. You know, in the story of your lives as teachers, you'll be played by Julie Andrews because, you know, you've entered into a kind of monastic life. I mean, some of you, it's no coincidence, sex in summer starts with the same lesson. Because it's the only time you'll be at home is during that long holiday break. The rest of the time you'll be out doing some CP-me. You know, that's that kind of self-centered development thing that we all do. So you're out doing all of that, you're completely obsessed and you're into it, but most teachers are actually terrified. When I started teaching, what drove me was the fear that within 2 seconds my classroom would turn into a reenactment of Lord of the Flies. Right? You know, that it would turn into chaos, everything would go out of control. And I'd seen Gulliver Travels, and I knew that even very small people could actually overwhelm you, regardless of your size. I mean, I'd seen that whole Lilliputian thing, and I knew that if 30 reception kids decided to go for it, that was it was over. Right? I mean, it was like, did you see Game of Thrones? The big episode at Hardhome, it was the zombie children that fell the heroin, right? Because you couldn't cope with the weekend. Terrifying business. So what you do is, you evolve strategies and techniques that allow you to feel safe in your classroom. and then you involve some that allow you to feel as if you're making progress. And then once you've got that, there's a danger that what you do is get stuck. And if you want to hear that much more brilliantly expressed than I've just done, or should I say even more brilliantly because I'm on coke, and what you need to do is you need to read Alex Quigley's article, which was in The Guardian recently, and such a shame Alex Quigley's not here, because he could have done this session and you would all have had a much better time, where he talks about teaching plateaus, and he talks about how teachers get stuck. And that whole concept's really well explored in that. So you need traction, you need momentum. And actually teachers generally, and again there's a boy walking out already, that's shameful. I take his camera with him, so I'm taking this too. But the other thing which I think is really important about this is that teachers like to move much more from the practical. I mean, I will say this about a million times, and I've been saying it constantly ever since I read her book. Deborah Kidd's book, Notes from the Front Line, I think is an absolutely fabulous book. And one of the things that I love most in it is the phrase that she has, where she says, it is pedagogical activism which will be the butterfly wing of change. And what she means by that, for anybody that's kind of like slow of understanding, what she means by that is that it's the kind of engagement that you people are involved in, looking at the practice of teaching and the practice of learning, and building forward from that towards a better learning and a better future for children. That's what will drive change in terms of that view that Deborah's taken there. And I think there's a huge amount of truth in that. Because one of the other things that I feel about the whole educational tourism agenda is that it doesn't take significant recognition of the movement towards organic change. And that's what this is about. That's what a day like this is about. This is a day where people who are not compelled to do anything by title, by status, by salary, or anything else, are coming together in the hope that they will learn something. And you're not only hoping that you will learn something, you're hoping that you will learn something which you'll be able to put into practice. And people, I think, are much more comfortable with that because you have that sense of reward and progression within yourself. Change only happens in the inside. You can't drive it through. I mean, that's where all these people, politicians, inspectors, Ofsted, all of these people are so misguided and so arrogant and so patronising. And I'm really going to give them a serious kick in the final session this afternoon, because I've actually got a whole DJ set that I'm going to use at the end of the day, which is a satire on the hierarchical abuse of power in education. You're going to love it if you stay for it. And if you can dance, please come, because I don't want to be alone in that moment. The point I'm making around that is that genuinely, if you don't believe in it, my very first teaching practice was in an inner city school in Edinburgh. And an inner city school in Edinburgh is a bit like somewhere in the suburbs anywhere else in the world, right? I mean, they still bring in canopies for their peace. But I'm in this inner city school in Edinburgh. One of the classes I have is a class called 3B4. 3B4 are non-certificate boys. They're all bigger than I am. It's the early 1970s. I'm a hippie. They're skinheads. I look like lunch to them. It's a terrible experience being in that room with them, and I'm having to teach them canals. Now, for some unknown reason, I've no idea why, I hadn't managed to fire their imagination with canals. I don't know what was going wrong. And I discovered that my tutor was coming out to give me my test lesson, and it was with 3B4 and it was on canals. And I went to my principal teacher, I said, can I do something meaningful? He said, no, we don't do meaningful, we do canals. So I was stuck with canals. I knew a car crash was coming. So what I did was I said to the boys, there's a guy coming out to see me teach you. It's like a test lesson. If I fail it, I'll never get to be a real teacher. Are you willing to help me? So they're a meeting. And at the end of the meeting, believe it or not, the lead alpha male in the class, who was called Begbie, for all you Craneswine fans, he was called Begbie. Begbie goes, I will help you, Mr. Connor. What do you want us to do? So we rehearsed the lesson. And the lesson was so long ago, it was based on a set of slides. So I showed them the slides, I told them which questions I was going to ask, I told them the answers I wanted. We shared them out, we practiced. We practiced for 2 solid periods. We even practiced putting our hands up, because some of these guys hadn't put their hands up since they were 6 years old, unless it was either to steal something or assault somebody. That was the way it was, right? So we practiced, we were perfect. Comes the day, comes the hour, the tutor's at the back of the room, I'm at the front, I begin the lesson, I put up the first slide. I say, can anybody tell me which canal this is? A forest of Hythe. But obviously, this is Begbie's question. He's the alpha male, and I say, Thomas. There's an awkward silence in the room. Nobody knew he was called Thomas. And even he appeared to have forgotten for quite a long time. And then eventually he goes, Mr. Cullen! That is the Forth and Clyde Canal. Absolutely, Thomas, I said. How did you know that? He said, because of the unique puddling technique they have used to make the walls watertight. My tutor thought he'd discovered the future of education, and its name was David Cameron. And unfortunately, at that point, this guy burst into the room, a big guy called Bruno. I said, Bruno, you're late because I'm a man that likes to state the obvious. He goes, I know, I've been for a smoke. In 2 periods of rehearsal, this is not previously occurred, I was unsure how to deal with the situation. As I'm pondering what I might or might not do, from the corner of his eye, he caught sight of the tutor at the back of the room and said something which sounded remarkably like, oh, for fuck's sake, Mr. Cameron, I completely forgot it was the day that keg was coming in. So you're wondering 3 things now. You're wondering 3 things. First thing you're wondering is, how on earth did I deal with this sudden and unexpected development in the lesson? And did I actually pass? And then the third thing you're wondering is, what's the point of this story? So let's take them in turn then. The first thing was, by some miracle, I went, Bruno, we'll discuss this later. Go and sit down. He sat down, he joined in the lesson. It was great. I'd completely re-engaged him. The second question, my tutor gave me a D-. It was a recoverable situation. He said that he wasn't going to fail me too badly and always formed a good relationship with a difficult bunch of boys. And the point of the story is, how close is that to what we do when we imitate any kind of practice? I mean, there's a cottage industry out there in terms of books and the perfect Ofsted lesson. There's a whole set of things that you could go and find that will tell you how to do things by rote in order to please somebody else. And this whole culture of visit and import is all around this culture of adoption, and adoption doesn't work. Because what adoption never does is it never takes it through to the heart of your behaviour. And the heart of your behaviour is what drives learning. John Thompson's book, This Much I Know About Love Over Fear, is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant book about making so clear how important care, engagement and affection is in learning. How Robert Hugh Bennett, anyway, how Robert had this brilliant thing when he was talking this morning, where he talked about the 4 elements that were essential to learning. And he talked about banter, and he talked about trust, but he talked about warmth. If kids don't feel warm, if they don't feel cared, they won't engage. And the example I always give around that is the example of Jamie's kitchen. You know Jamie Oliver? Apologies for people who've heard this. That's what's wrong with this country. You get some tosser that can make a decent curry in half an hour, and they let him pontificate about education. I mean, I can do a decent lesson. Nobody's ever asked me to make a programme about cooking. So anyway, Jamie gets to make this programme, and his theory is that if he gets in some experts, they'll enthrall kids and kids will learn. Michael Gove shared the same theory and lost his job, which is a good thing for all of us. No E.T. impersonator should ever hold that amount of courage. But anyway, right, so he brings in David Starkey, the historian. David Starkey is supposed to prove that he's a first-rate historian, a first-rate communicator, a first-rate educator. And he goes in, and the only thing he manages to do is prove he's a first-rate tosser. Because what's in his head is the history. That's what matters to him. It's the subject matter, it's the content. He doesn't care about the kids. And it takes them 2.5 nanoseconds to recognise that. They disengage completely, and no learning takes place. And the message coming out of that is that what we need to think about in terms of how we move forward is we need to think about the fact that it's the schools that adapt, it's the individuals that adapt, it's not the ones that adopt that make successful change. With the culture of adoption and import, all you get is transient movement forward. And what you get, and it's astonishing, isn't it? Because one of the things that the Conservatives did was they went to Sweden. They went to Sweden and they saw the free schools. And they looked upon the free schools in wonder. And they thought, that's exactly what we need. That's what we need in this country. And none of them, so far, have mentioned the OECD report, the country report in Sweden that's come out in the last month. It's the first OECD report in any country to actually use the phrase basket case. Right? Basket case. That's what the Swedish system's become. It is a failing fallen system where marketisation has led to disruption and destruction in the system. But we've imported that, and the interesting thing is, despite the OECD report, we're sticking with it. As my good friend and colleague Tim Brighouse is fond of saying, the Secretary of State for Education used to have 3 powers. One was the removal of air raid shelters from school playgrounds, which he's not as much called to use for a while. And the second one, and the important one, was to ensure an adequate supply of school places for children. And he's given up on that. He's waiting for 500 free schools to ride over the horizon and honour the responsibility that he should be democratically, or she should be democratically accountable for. Now, that's the kind of warning, I think, around this. Because the other thing about it is it feeds exactly into this culture around the tyranny of data and exhortation. And my favourite examples are that, I mean, at the moment, people are obsessed with data. Data is essentially a post-mortem, right? It tells you about the state of the corpse. It's too late to do anything by the time you get the data for the children who've generated. And what we've got into, we've got culture where data is dominant. Interesting conversation that I had in a school that I was going to do a bit of work in, and I said to them, you know, what's your main target for this year? And the answer that came back was getting more A-levels for children in the school. And I said to them, is that a good thing? And they looked at me as if I had 3 heads. The reason why I was asking the question is that you can hothouse kids through A-levels. You can give them support, you can do all sorts of things, you can give them exam techniques, you can encourage their parents to get tutors, you can do all sorts of things, and you can get them A-levels, you can get them to achievement qualification levels beyond anything you would have predicted for them, and over 13% of them at the moment will go on to university and fail in the first year. And the ones that will fail in the first year are the ones for whom we struggled hardest to get A-levels. That school were intending to push through, and what they do by pushing them through is they use the data to serve the school and not to serve the children. Because that's not about what children need. These children might need a vocational pathway. These children might need an alternative approach. These children might need a blended curriculum. These children might be better off with some work-based learning, some college-based learning, and a bit of school-based learning. That doesn't work from the stats. And it's that tyranny of data rather than an obsession with practice, and it comes with that exhortation quality. Right? I mean, I'm now, and I keep saying this to people, I'm sorry I said it to you last week, see the next person that tells me to work smarter, they're going to get a face full of forehead. It's as simple as that. You know, I think there is still a significant place for violence in education. Honestly, I think at times it's been underutilised. Because basically when somebody tells you to work smarter, what are they really saying to you? They're saying to you you're working pretty stupid just now. And, you know, that's offensive, I think, so punch them. But that's the whole thing, and one of the other things I love is the inappropriate analogy. David Brailsford, you know, everybody heard David Brailsford, the British cycling coach, the Sky Team coach, and we're all examining the marginal gain. David Brailsford gets folk to ride bikes a wee bit faster. Right? Last time I looked, he just put the pedals round and round. They're still doing that in bikes. There's a complication. They've got handlebars. Sometimes you have to do that with them, and sometimes you have to do that with them. And if you've got a real complexity of gears, you might actually have to do that with them too. I mean, it's amazing. If you've got 2 sets of gears, you might have to use both your thumbs. Incredibly complex operations compared to what you do in school. Right? You're working with children in school, whether you're planning a lesson, you're revising and servicing it, you're delivering it, you've got outcomes that you're continually reassessing. You're doing all of that at the same time you've got technicals in every corner of the room, taking the temperature of every child and every learner, and responding immediately when you feel like it's drifting away. I think David Brailsford should be listening to you, don't you? See the point I'm getting at? That we're in this culture of exhortation, and it's this whole obsession with perfection rather than progress. And the other thing is a total lack of clarity when we make these international comparisons about what the basis for quality is. And a few thoughts I think around it. First, and that's the point I thought, how does that happen? Yes, so I think we need to decide what the basis for any comparisons. What the basis for any comparisons that we might make are. And that's not working. So let's forget it for a moment. But what should have come up at that point? But what should have come up was bread and roses. Anybody seen Pride?
Yes.
Yeah? Right. Those of you who haven't seen it, think Blackburn and shame of yourselves and go and see it immediately. Right? It's a film about a group of gay and lesbian people who decide that they're going to support the miners, and they adopt a Welsh mining village. And they go out there and they work directly with them. They encounter all sorts of prejudice, all sorts of difficulties, all of that. And gradually they come together as a community. And one of the key scenes is in a miners' welfare. And the main activist rises up, he delivers a stirring speech that ends with victory to the miners. And as he finishes, and as people are applauding, a woman's voice gradually creeps into the room, singing Blood and Roses. And we've spoken about this. As we go marching, marching, at the dawning of the day, a million households silent, a million mill lofts grey, are struck by all the radiance that a sudden sun exposes. For the people they are saying, give us bread, but give us roses. And in the final verse, it talks about the struggle, unnumbered women dead, and it talks about the struggle that will be made, and it finishes in the line that the people fight for bread, but we fight for roses too. And my question around this is, how on earth have we forgotten that? How on earth have we forgotten that capability of working people that people would pretentiously describe as ordinary working people, capable of generating that ambition for richness rather than wealth? And one of the great things that Hal Roberts did in his session was he actually made clear what it is that will make the difference in terms of closing the attainment gap. It's not around better phonics, it's not around finding better ways of teaching mathematics, it's about finding ways to engagement. Because where the attainment gap exists, it exists among those young people who are not engaged and don't have a starting point. And one of the reasons why they don't have a starting point is they have no concept of what better in their lives might be. And in the same way that they have no need for vocabulary, and therefore have very little because they have no richness in their lives to describe. And there is something, I think, hugely important about getting it right about what that curriculum should be. We will not have ambition, we will not have cultural progress, we will not have any of those things if we have children who are more obsessed with Caitlyn Jenner and the Kardashian family than they are with any meaningful form of social change. And there's a reality there that we're simply not tackling, we're not even talking about it. And when we start to talk about what the curriculum should be and achieve and what the lessons that we should learn, we should listen to Bread and Roses, and we should read Pablo Casals. Pablo Casals' wonderful quote up there, and I don't have time to go through all of it, but I love that line about we should say to each of them, the children that were educated, do you know what you are? You're a marvel. You're unique. In the entire world, there's no other child exactly like you. And I know that lots of people will come back and talk about that as dated and idealistic. But where is the ambition in the system to create the Shakespeares and the Michelangelos instead of an obsession with getting the data from the school right? And as you move through it, we're moving away from this kind of quote, which comes from a report in Scotland in 1947, and I just love it. The good school is to be assessed not by any tale of examination success, however impressive, but by the extent to which it has filled the years of youth with security, graciousness, and ordered freedom, and has been the seedbed for the flowering in due season of all that is good report. Find me a report nowadays that matches that language. Right? Find me a report nowadays that matches that language. And is yet that not absolutely true? And the contention has to be that instead of looking outside for the data, we need to look within and talk about what it is we need to do. And what we need to do, and one of the things which I think is an interesting lesson to learn within Scotland, what we need to do is look at the whole situation in context in which the child exists. There's the reality for lots of our kids. The reality is that they do not suffer from one single form of poverty. They suffer from multiple poverty and multiple issues. And one of the most killing of the issues that they suffer from is the poverty of aspiration. But because that's the complexity that children are involved in, that's the complexity within which they exist. And the reality is, if we want to close the attainment gap, we need not to look to Sweden, but we need to look at our own cultures and our own services. And one of the things that never gets talked about, Nicky Morgan. Right? Nicky Morgan does get talked about. She's about to get talked to her again. I like to call her Nicky Morgan because it implies a degree of intimacy that she's completely unaware of. I mean, Nicky's an absolute genius. I mean, she gets her first opportunity to make a speech, and what did she talk about? She talks about coasting schools, right? Can I give you an alternative version of coasting schools? That's schools that can't be bothered their arse doing the best for kids. Okay? If she got up and said, I'm going to do something about schools that can't be bothered doing their arse to do the best for kids, you'd get a totally different response to it, wouldn't you? But you sugarcoat it into some strange phrase about coasting schools. That's the reality of it. So Nicky Morgan has the audacity to pretend that she's got more ambition for your kids than you do. Nicky Morgan is prepared to pretend that she cares more about children than she's never seen, than kids you wrestle with, differentiate for, challenge, support, love, do all of these things for, and then she comes and patronises with a statement like that. And the answer to coasting schools, bring in new superheads. Where's she going to find them? Where are these teachers, these superheads, roaming the land, their capes flowing behind them? The expression of gallantry writ large across their face as they move on to rescue yet another school before being indicted for some financial irregularity. This is what seems to have happened to most of them. And of course the other thing that we need to do, as well as getting the superhead, right, as well as getting that in, you have to become an academy. Why? So that you can become isolated. So that you become isolated. What purchase does an academy have in bringing together these agencies that are absolutely critical to changing the educational prospects of children? Because the reality is that we shouldn't be isolating our schools. We should be looking at how far we can do this. We should be looking at how far we can pull together those services, those agencies, those elements which are there to support children and to make that difference. Because my contention would be that although schools can make a difference, and although schools should make a difference, they cannot make all the difference. Yes. And one of my serious concerns about you as teachers, and my serious concerns about head teachers, is that we are actually building a cross in our quest for improvement. And we're building a cross in our quest for improvement, which actually means that teachers are burning out, that teachers are leaving the profession, that teachers are asking serious questions about their future. And as far as superheads go, stick them up your butt, because you can't even get heads, ordinary heads, for the vacancies that we've got. That's the reality that we're dealing in. So we need to make sure that we become a central part of that community, and that's about building the kind of relationships that means somebody gets alongside the child and has the capacity out of that to actually generate links and make sense of that world for the kid. In Scotland, we tried to do it by a system which is called GIVFEC. And the GIVFEC model is just basically about trying to do that. It's about trying to put a smile on that kid's face and give them some prospects and give them some possibilities. And it's about trying to look at the world that the kid lives in and look beyond simply attainment, but also try and look at those things that we need to do in terms of understanding family background and context, knowing what's going to happen and when, thinking about guidance and support, thinking about play, about encouragement and fun. In other words, what we're trying to get at in this context is a holistic view of what learning might look like and what progress might be based on. And it cannot be a system that simply ends at the school gate. So that whole culture of isolation is something that deeply and desperately needs to change. And interestingly, one of the things that we've tried to do in Scotland, we've tried to ally to a design of the curriculum which is different. So I think there are potential lessons that we can learn from that. So the curriculum in Scotland is built on experiences and outcomes, not on content specifically. It's built on experiences and outcomes, what children should have done and what outcomes they might expect to get. Now, it's a flawed model, and I'm perfectly happy to look at some of the flaws around it, but the intention was it was something that would be simpler and less prescriptive. And it would be something which would allow opportunities for decisions about how and what was done in the curriculum. And it was supposed ultimately to be based on 4 capacities. You can get this presentation, by the way, and I'll explain to you how at the end. But it was to enable people to get these 4 capacities. These were the things that we deemed were the qualities that people needed as learners, that they needed to be successful as learners. able to take on further learning, able to adopt, adapt and move forward. That they would be confident individuals, that they would have the resilience that would allow them to take risk in learning, that they would be effective contributors, that they would be people who would engage, that the obsession would not simply be around what education would give to them. Because one of the really challenging things is that when we make the international comparisons that we make, the concept of social mobility that exists in those making the comparison is social mobility as rescue. It's basically about recruiting smart working class kids into the hierarchy. And Hirsch, I heard the boy Hirsch, you come across him, American guy, he's becoming very popular these days, I believe. And Hirsch was talking about knowledge, and there's a brilliant piece in the video, which I think I actually picked up from you. There's a brilliant piece in the video where he sits and he says, yeah, the club have knowledge. We need to give our children the same knowledge so they can get into the club. Now you can see the sense of what he's saying, but how offensive is that? It's a refusal to change the closed world, a commitment to plotting better ways to access it. That's not what education is for. Education is around this whole idea of taking people from who they are to what they might become, and making sure that that journey is further and faster because of what you do. And it's helpful in Scotland that they're trying to build a single assessment system, more appropriate assessment and all of that. But the key point I think I want to make around this is that it hasn't worked. That's what they've been offered in Scotland. That's what they've been offered. They've been offered an improvement programme with many strands. It's not a one and done implementation of a new curriculum in the way that the national curriculum is. And actually the response from teachers has been to ask for more structure. There is as much good practice here in England as there is in Scotland, despite the fact that Scotland has this much more permissive climate. Now why are we not exploring that question? Why are we blindly touring to Taiwan? Why are we blindly sailing to Singapore? Why are we blindly doing all of that stuff when there's a big key question right on our doorstep that we should be exploring? How do we take the energy of a day like today? How do we take the vibrancy that you people are committing to and generating? How do we take that vibrance and translate it into some meaningful change in the system? That's a massive question. You're not going to find the answer in Sweden. And so the argument I'm trying to make is that even with these permissions and all of the problems and difficulties that we've got, we should be asking these questions. Because here's how we celebrated the first year of Curriculum for Excellence. Right, in Scotland. Brilliant, progressive model. And actually it was a year when we celebrated with a flirtation with meltdown. Kids were crying, folk were complaining of exams, teachers were stressed out their box. I mean, teachers were getting acupuncture live in their classrooms just to help them get through the day. I mean, all of that stuff was going on. We were almost at the point of self-destruction. We decluttered the curriculum, but assessment was going mental because we neither had the confidence to go with the looser model because we kept coming back to accountability and rigour. We kept coming back to accountability and rigour and moving away from potential and possibility. We kept moving away from reassurance and trust and moving towards accountability and prescription. And so we started off decluttering the curriculum, and now we've got a report on how to tackle bureaucracy. And at the same time, what you're needing to recognise is that in my country, there's the situation that we have. Right? We start things brilliantly and ambitiously in Scotland, and we often try to do the right thing, but we always finish up with it compromised. Whereas, say what you like about Gove, Gove irrevocably changed the landscape of education in England. And he didn't even serve a full parliamentary term as Secretary of State for Education. There are things that were done under Gove which cannot be undone and will not be undone. He did all of that really quickly. He enforced change. In Scotland, we're trying to make change at a pace that teachers are absolutely comfortable with, regardless of the pace that children require. Now, Gove might have been moving in the wrong direction, but he did move and he generated and he got movement within the sector. We need to ask how that works. And I think these are the really, really big questions for us. Because in Scotland, we're inhibited between caution and courage. We start off with courageous in terms of ideas and cautious in terms of implementation. There's a big question. What would you do here? What would you do in your schools if you had that kind of total freedom? If you had that ability to turn things around? But let's bear in mind that you're having to do it now with budgets being reduced, and in Scotland we've got an expectation that workload will be reduced. So it's how we manage to do all of that together. I think these are big questions. It's not any different here from it is in Scotland. There's all of these priorities coming down. You know, careers education, vocational education, that's looming over the horizon. Raising attainment's always been there. You know, you need to invest more in finance, you need to do this. I mean, my worry at the moment is that we keep spinning more and more and more plates, and we're never clear which are the Wedgwood and which are the IKEA. And nobody ever has a conversation about subtraction, they only have a conversation about addition. And my worry is that what we do is we burn out a willing profession because we overload them. All of these questions are posed within the United Kingdom. And I think the lessons and the answers can be posed. And one of the things about today, which is important from Amjad, important from Howell, no doubt important from the other questions, that's where we need to start from. We need to start from what it is that learners need. What are the capacities that they need to make sense of the modern world? And we need to look more at those wider capacities, that ability to make and shape, to give children a sense of control over their lives. Children learn to make, shape and control lives and decisions by making and shaping ideas and art and dance and all of these elements. You need bread and you need rosy. And we need to give kids those skills and those inquiries. So when we build the curriculum, that's what we should build it around. And when we talk about demands in the workplace, we should recognise that employers are now no longer simply looking for compliance. The problem, of course, is that the government currently has a vision that will become economically viable as a country by driving down wages and worsening working conditions. So compliance is actually coming back onto the agenda in a way that it hasn't been for years. But if you talk to employers in industry, they're looking for creativity and they're looking for enterprise. And if you look at what we know works from all sorts of different bits, Howell this morning quoting Dylan Williams, I mean, there's some of the stuff from Assessment is for Learning about what actually works around learning. We know that. We know that it's the care, it's the trust, it's the banter, it's the warmth, it's those things that make learning work. We know what the subtle trust factors are, what the interventions are that make a difference. And yet we continue to look outside as if we require more knowledge and more information. And I'm not being Luddite, and I'm not shutting off the quest for knowledge, but until we recognise that those kids who do well, the kids who do really well, are the ones who can do last questions, not just the ones that can do first questions. We need a curriculum that doesn't try and give every child a fabricated answer, a fabricated response that's ready for them to put simply onto the paper in a test and move on. We need kids who can look at the question that they didn't expect and be able to think about it in terms of what the question asks, what they can bring to it and put the two together. We need to look for children who are resilient and thoughtful. If we teach our kids to be able to answer last questions, every question's a first question. Because you apply the last question skills to any questions, you get the answer. See what I'm driving at? And yet what we've done, because of this culture of import, of adoption, we've become obsessed with the hurdle that's immediately there for our children. So people are obsessed with how well kids do in key stage tests, en masse. Right? It's the data that is tyranny, not the prospects of the children. And what we've stopped doing in many instances is we've stopped thinking about how we fill the years of youth with graciousness and all of the other things that were in that quote. We haven't equipped kids for the long run, we've only equipped them for the hurdle. And if we think about some of the elements that are there in terms of curriculum planning, and it's been said actually in both sessions, more or less, that I've been through today, and I know from the Twitter feed it's been said in others, we need to own the curriculum. We must own the curriculum. We must take charge. At the end of the day today, when we finish, you're actually going to go out the door, hopefully, unless you're squatting. But if you finish, you're going to go out the door to the Stanton Warriors. So that'll be good for you, that'll uplift you. The other thing you'll go out the door to, and the last tune that you'll hear before you go out is Trombone Shorties. Amazing track, Out of This Place. And the chorus in Trombone Shorties songs. You and I, let this be our battle cry. Raise your fist up to the cloud. No one else can stop us now. And if by chance I happen to fall, lift me up and lead us all. Because that's where change is going to come from. It's not going to come from that external perspective, and you're not going to get it from some educational tourist coming home. You're going to get it if we take control, if we broker the kind of arrangements, if we work with people like John Thompson, who has managed amazingly to get himself into a situation where he's respected as a head teacher and also as somebody who challenges within the system. So he's somebody who's in a position to help us to make the kind of change we need to make and still believes that change needs to be made. We need to bring together and activate that, and we won't get that unless we activate. So we need to design the curriculum that we teach, and we need to be able to think about what we do and how we do it. And that's what I'm really hoping that you'll take away from today, is that real sense of commitment around vision and drive and capacity, that willingness to build a curriculum forward. I mean, one of the things, again, that was wonderful in Howell's session, Howell's all about early years practice. Secondary training is all about early years practice. It's about creating an experience from which children can learn and then capturing the learner. And that's the transfer that we need to make. And we need to discuss standards, but not impose them. And that's virtually what's come back from all of these international comparisons, because you know what the new God is? The new God is PISA. And if you analyse PISA, it's actually a league table of compliance. The countries that do really well in PISA, would you want to live in them? Right? Would you want to be educated in Korea? Come on, I ask you, we'll cover some of that stuff. Would you actually want to be educated in a system in Singapore where children don't believe in their own ability and capacity because they know perfectly well that they wouldn't have to work that hard if they were any good? That's how they internalise it. All we're concerned about is the scores that we get. We're not interested in the damage done, because the damage done would prevent us making the simplistic political point that we want to bring back to further whip teachers towards improvement through threat and exposure rather than through trust and inspiration. And so what we need to do is that. We need to make sure that we set the standards and we set them right across the board for the roses and for the bread. And we need to make sure as we go through it that we finish up very clear that when it comes to European tourism, when it comes to Asian tourism, when it comes to the educational visit and import, we're clear about the decision. And we can think about this. Should we stay or should we go? And what I'm saying is, let's stay. Let's stand our ground. Let's learn from each other. Let's make organic change. And let's turn this world around. You and I, let this be our battle cry. And now, John Thompson! I'm glad you like that, because the final session's going to be total shit. No, I didn't mean your final session.